Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's commentary, my commentary on Season 3 of Star Trek Voyager. In this video, I will, examine Season 3 of Voyager from a writing perspective and from behind-the-scenes perspective, and mostly having to do with the writing and how Season 3 of Voyager ended up the way it did. So this is a companion piece to a video I did a year or so ago, which was my commentary on the writing of Season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, this video in many ways is the inverse of that video, because that video was about Michel Piller joining the writing staff and how he saved Star Trek, how The Next Generation went from a schlocky B-grade syndication show to a top-notch sci-fi masterpiece just instantly at the start of, or somewhat gradually, but pretty much instantly at the start of Season 3, and how Michel Piller really enriched Star Trek and made Next Generation a classic and helped create Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And this video is about Michel Piller leaving the Star Trek franchise, and particularly Voyager, and how Voyager suffered from his loss. So pretty much the opposite. So let's start with Season 2 of Voyager. Apparently, during Season 2 of Voyager, Michel Piller, his idea was to do the Kazon and have that as a recurring arc. Other writers such as Jeri Taylor described the Kazon as his project, and described Seska as one of his children, one of his brain children, and said that he had several characters and plot lines that he felt were his, and they mainly mentioned Kazon and Seska, but I think Suitor was another one. So apparently he went off and did this other show. Was a showrunner for the show called Legend, which starred Richard Dean Anderson, MacGyver, and John Delancey. And I vaguely remember it used to come on UPN right after Voyager. And I had no interest in watching it. It's a Western. I'm not into Westerns. And I think I watched an episode and it looked boring. And so it didn't last long. And Michel Piller was back on Voyager. And some of the writers were describing like how Jeri Taylor pretty much had free reign while he was off doing Legend. I mean, he would consult on the scripts and have input on the scripts, but she was pretty much running the day-to-day. And then Michel Piller came back. Some of the writers surmised that was difficult for Jeri Taylor to now have to give up power, so to speak, or at least share it with Michel Piller. And a lot of the writers of Season 2, from what I'm reading, the most quotes I'm reading from is Kenneth Biller. He's apparently one of the most vocal. Didn't really like Michel Piller in Season 2. Didn't like how he was running the writer's room. They all acknowledge that he's a great writer and that they learned a lot from him. But they described his style as too restrictive. Like that he was forcing them, or really being really restrictive. Piller himself kind of compared it to Season 3 of TNG, again the last video I did, where there was the Roddenberry box that Piller saw as, where other writers saw as, a hindrance, he saw as a challenge. And he embraced the Roddenberry box and really was being really restrictive and challenging his writers to the point where every writer left at the end of season 3 except for Ronald D. Moore, who was a rookie. And so Michael Piller described season 2 of Voyager as being similar to that, where instead of being the Roddenberry box, it was now the Piller box. That he had very sort of restrictive rules on what Star Trek is and is not. Also, he talked about in DVD commentaries for season 2 about how he challenged the writers to think, not just come up with a cool action adventure or a cool, weird sci-fi phenomenon or weird shit. He said that he made sure to challenge the writer, what is this episode about? And this is something he mentioned in my research for season 3 of TNG as well. So this is a staple of him as a showrunner, which is why I think he's the best showrunner Star Trek ever had and the savior of Star Trek. He would challenge people. What is this episode about? How does this challenge our characters? How does it improve our characters? How does it push the story forward? What is this episode saying about the human condition? And that is at the heart of Star Trek. And so it seems like he was, but even by his own accounts, he was pushing the writers very hard in season 2. And, challenging them to the point where they were stressed out and wanting to quit. Now, I will say that there's a lot of somewhat contradictory information and mixed stories. So I tried to do as much research as I could. I have this funky book with all the quotes from the writers, although the section on season 3 of Voyager is not that extensive, or on Piller's departure. For my commentary video on season 3 of TNG, I had a lot more information, a lot more references. There was this Blu-ray feature that really went into really deep detail on what the writing situation was like in season 3 of TNG. There's nothing like that, unfortunately, for season 3 of Voyager, so I'm having to sort of piece together through individual interviews and certain quotes what I think was the situation. So my information, my conclusions may not be completely accurate. I'm just trying to draw the best conclusions that I can. So all that being said, I was confused at first on what happened at Piller's departure, because watching the DVD featurette of Voyager season 2, and I remember, I believe when I first recorded my review for Basics, which was a couple years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I said that Piller left the show at the end of season 2 and did the So Long Suckers routine where he was like, all right, you guys figure out how to write part 2, and just left them hanging. But then I got some comments on that video saying that's not true. Piller didn't leave. He was pushed out of the show. He was forced out. And so this is when I was doing research on it, and it does seem a little bit contradictory. Like, I've heard some quotes from, like, the quote from the DVD of Piller talking, he didn't say anything about being pushed out. He was saying how he thought it was time to leave Star Trek, and he wanted to leave the writers with this last bit of wisdom. And there's other quotes online of Piller saying that he felt it was time to leave Star Trek, that after 7 years, he felt like he needed to move on, and he believed it was now time to move on. But in this nifty little book, there's also a quote from him saying that the writers went to Berman and said, if Piller stays, we all go. And that Berman related that to Piller, and then Piller said, well, okay, then I might as well leave then. So I feel like it was kind of a like, both things can be true at the same time. I think it was kind of combination of other things. And I think the writer is going to Berman and saying, look, if Piller stays, we go, was the catalyst of something Piller was already considering. Because we know that he nearly left the show at the end of season 3 of TNG after only one season because of the experience of all the writers like being unhappy with him. But he ended up staying, and thank God he did. So it seems like this, and plus just working on Star Trek for 7 years straight, I think all this sort of combined and pushed to a head, and the catalyst was, the Berman saying, hey, the writers don't want you here. And I think instead of fighting it or getting angry about it, being like, okay, I understand, I'll leave. Now, my controversial opinion is that when the writers went to Rick Berman and said, if Piller stays, we go. If I were Rick Berman, my response to that would have been, don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. Because I think Piller is more important than these writers. I'm sorry, he just was. Now, granted, I guess his heart wasn't really in it, but I think it was, because it seems to me that he was challenging them to do better, to say, what is this episode about? But hey, that's just me. And I don't know if it was all the writers. Again, the research I've done on this was vague. I just know Kenneth Biller was involved, which I've talked about him in other videos. I don't think he's a particularly good writer, so yes, get rid of him if he's going to be that whiny. But I don't know if maybe Jeri Taylor. I do know that Jeri Taylor disagreed on certain story points, such as the Kazon. She wasn't a fan of the Kazon. She wasn't a particular fan of the serialized storytelling push that Michael Piller had. But she did describe of having a really good and strong working relationship with him, which is opposed to the other writers who felt that he was not a personable person. I also talked about this in my season 3 TNG commentary, that he's not an easy person to get along with. He's not very personable, and when he pushes people, he can come off as curt and sensitive. And so a lot of the writers, I believe, were having personal issues with him and with his approach, and plus they felt like their creativity was being stifled. Jeri Taylor described it as, once Piller left the show, that they felt like their constraints have been lifted and they were free to explore a lot of different things. Now, you would think that would be a good thing, but I'll get to that shortly. But because the thing is I think Piller's push, even if he didn't do it in a kind way, I think it produced better results. I think his instincts of having Voyager more serialized would have improved the show. Like nowadays, I've heard this opinion repeatedly over and over again. The most common consensus, I would say, about Voyager as a whole is that it had a lot of potential, but it failed to live up to that potential because it wouldn't take risks and it wouldn't embrace serialization. Now, back in the 90s, the serializations was seen as a no-no because there's no DVDs, there's no streaming services. Like, the only way to watch an episode is when it airs on TV, so you're at the mercy of seeing it on reruns. So if you miss an episode during a serialization, then you could be completely lost with no way to recover from it. And many studio execs said this about Deep Space Nine when they did serialization. They told them that you're killing the show, that people won't be able to keep up from it. And granted, their ratings didn't didn't boost, they did decline, but at the same rate that they already had been declining. So I would argue that serialization did not damage the show, as they said. In fact, it's led to, once the era of streaming did come about, it led to a renaissance, a revival of Deep Space Nine, where it's more relevant in modern times than it was when it first aired. So, which is why Deep Space Nine is looked at more of a cult classic and a fan favorite more so than Voyager. But I mean, Voyager has its followers, but I feel like the opinion I encounter the most about Voyager is that it's wasted potential. Like, it had potential and didn't live up to it because it wouldn't take risks. But I already talked about that in my commentary about seasons 5, 6, and 7, and how those were the play it safe seasons that refused to take risks. I believe that season 1 and 2. And 3 and 4 did take risks. They did, at least 1 and 2 did try to embrace serialization. They tried to embrace a sense of community. Voyager wasn't just a spaceship flying off and doing adventures. It was a community. These people were stuck there on the other side of the galaxy alone, and all they had with each other, and they were building a community. You had that sense in season 1 and 2, and I do have an inkling. It's my guess that this had a lot to do with Michel Piller, is striving to make the characters the center of the story and to breathe life and make this a livable world building place, the same way he did with the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine. And so, by kicking Michel Piller off the show, I think that damaged the show irreparably. Now, Jeri Taylor took over as showrunner in season 3, and she remained showrunner in season 4. Now, season 4, I do think was an amazing season. I do think they recovered even without Piller there. But I think it took them a while to adjust. So for those of you who don't know, and I know not everyone agrees with me, but after rewatching all the seasons of Voyager and analyzing them, season 3 of Voyager is my least favorite. It's the season that I think had the worst writing, where the plots were kind of all over the place. They were bland, uninteresting, and in many cases just outright bad. And season 2 of Voyager had some really bad episodes from really bad plots like Threshold, Tuvix, and Innocence. But it also had some really amazing episodes. And for the most part, even through some of the bad episodes, it still had that sense of character, that sense of community. And it just had a much stronger, more interesting feel to it throughout the season. Even if the stories didn't always connect to each other, you still felt like a sense of continuity. You felt like there was character growth, that these, even if there was no story continuity, there was still character continuity, much in the same way as Strange New Worlds, but not to that extent, but more subtle than that. But similar to TNG was the same way. But with season 3 of Voyager, they didn't seem to have that at all. There didn't seem to be any sort of character continuity. In fact, in many cases, the characters were being reworked and rethought and reinvented, which, of course, this problem got exasperated in seasons 5, but I already talked about that in another video. But yeah, I always wondered, like, what happened? with season 3, and I was doing a lot of research, reading a lot of interviews, but there's not much out there. But what happened? How did Voyager do the opposite of what TNG did? That TNG had a really terrible first 2 seasons, and then it like picked up, it like soared and got so much better, where Voyager had a strong start with the strong first 2 seasons, and then just bleh, just kind of failed, plopped on its 3rd season. And so obviously I'm saying a big reason for that is the departure of Michel Piller, but Jeri Taylor managed really well in season 4. So why was season 3 so terrible? And the best that I could figure is that a quote from Jeri Taylor where she said it was really difficult doing the show without Michel Piller at first, that it was difficult not having him there, and it took some time to adjust. And that's what I think it boils down to. I think it boils down to there was an adjustment period. They had to re-figure out the show without Piller there, and so they were trying a bunch of shit and throwing against the wall, and a lot of it did not work. Now this gets back to what I was saying about how they felt free of constraints and they could try all these things. Well, as I would guess, those constraints were actually a good thing, that Michel Piller used the Piller box, as he now called it, to challenge them, to make them think outside of the box. No, that's not the right term, inside of the box, but to challenge them more, to stretch their imaginations, to challenge their creative sides, to push them further. And I think without that box, without those constraints, they would just willy-nilly fly out and do all these crazy ideas, most of them not good. It's kind of like a writing exercise that they often tell new writers to do, or even experienced writers, is that to just write it in a stream of consciousness, like whatever comes to mind, just quickly just write out whatever you can think of, blah blah blah. They say like 95% of it will be complete garbage, but there might be 5% in there that is good and that you can build on, and it lets you free your mind of all the garbage too. I feel like that's what they did with season 3 of Voyager. I think that they without Piller's leadership, as much as I do like Taylor, but without his leadership, they didn't have the focus. As much as they hated him, as much as they hated the constraints, I think it made them better writers. And this is, I think, borne out by season 3. Now, when I originally did my review for Basics, I said that I talked about season 3 in the past as being sort of writing from behind, like they were really stressed and they were short of time and it was very chaotic. And someone argued with me about that, saying no, that's what season 2 was like. And then doing my further research, it seems that is in fact the case, that season 2 was described as sort of chaotic. But I think it's chaotic in the sense that a lot of the writers were unhappy because they were, didn't like Piller putting all these restraints on them and didn't like the atmosphere in the writers' room. And so I couldn't find anything specific to what the atmosphere was like in season 3 of Voyager, if it was helpful or not helpful, but there's no indication that it was chaotic. The reason why I thought it was chaotic was because I heard about Basics Part 2, that they had originally wrote that episode where Seska survives, and 20 or so minutes, like right before they were about to film the scene with Martha Hatchett, they rewrote it to have Seska die. And that, to me, makes it sound like they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and that they were just making it. Because if you ever work on a production, if you know anything about film and television production, that's unheard of. You don't, like, it's a very bad production. The production's in very poor shape if you're doing rewrites while filming is going on. It has happened, but it's always a sign of chaos, and it usually leads to bad episodes. And there's also another example in the episode Blood Fever. Apparently, originally it was supposed to be Tuvok down on the planet with B'Elanna, not Tom Paris. They weren't going to do this Tom Paris romance, but they rewrote it like right before filming. And so this is why I get the impression that season 3 was chaotic. But I learned something interesting, and again, this seems a bit contradictory, because I always knew that there were 4 episodes that were filmed and produced in season 1 that were withheld for season 2. I always knew that was the case. I did not know that there were also 4 episodes filmed at the end of season 2 that were withheld for season 3. This was a bit surprising. So those 4 episodes were Basics Part 2, Flashback, Sacred Ground, and oh god, what was the other one? Flashback, Sacred Ground, and False Prophets. That was the other one, False Prophets. So this kind of, so this goes against my So Long Suckers thing that I thought Piller did, because apparently Piller actually did write Basics Part 2. And I've read some behind the scenes stuff that he had arguments with Jeri Taylor over, keeping Seska alive and stuff like that. And in the DVD commentary, or not commentary, but featurette, Michael Piller was saying how the last episode he wrote was Basics, and it was about, he wanted to bring the writers back to their basics or whatever. It was a metaphor for that. I thought he was talking about Basics Part 1, but apparently he was talking about Basics Part 2. He was actually still there. And the reason why I say it's contradictory is because Jeri Taylor also talked about how they wrote Basics Part 1 and then went on like a 6-week break and came back and wrote Part 2. But if Part 2 was filmed at the same time as Season 2, like, I had assumed the break would be in between seasons, but I suppose they could have taken the break while filming was still going on and then come back and write those last batch of episodes before they got around to filming it while they were still filming. I suppose if they were really ahead of the game, but then that goes against season 2 being chaotic. So I don't know. Maybe that's the best I can make it, but it's kind of contradictory to me. But I do get the sense, like, and plus what other quotes from Taylor and Piller suggest, that they did not know how Basics was going to end when they wrote Part 1. So the information that they filmed at the same time at the end of season 2 is like, does not compute, but I suppose they just took that break in between while they were still filming earlier episodes, I suppose. I don't know. So I'm not sure, but I think this implies that Piller didn't work on, Sacred Ground or False Prophets or any of those other ones, that he just did Basic Parts 2 as his last episode and pieced out. Now, it was Piller's original idea to make Chakotay's son an ongoing storyline throughout season 3. It was his idea to keep the Kazon storyline going, keep the Seska storyline going throughout season 3, and to have Suitor become a main character. And it seems pretty evident to me that when they wrote Basics Part 1, he still had all this in mind, but I I feel like, and I don't know this, I'm just guessing, but I feel like the decision was made for Piller to leave the show in between the writing of Basics Part 1 and 2. And even though Piller did work on Part 2, I think at this stage he knew he was going, and he knew that Jeri Taylor did not want to continue any of those storylines that he wanted to do. Jeri Taylor, and I do like her. I do think she's a really good showrunner and a good writer, but I don't agree with her instinct of being against continuity, because she didn't want any continuity. She wanted the show to be purely episodic. She said in the way that Next Generation was, but I think she misunderstands Next Generation, because I don't think Next Generation was purely episodic, not in the way she tried to make Voyager in season 3. But yeah, she wanted to be no continuity, no recurring aliens, no Kazon, no Vidians, completely new adventures week to week. And so you can kind of tell this in Basics Part 2 that they were doing everything they could to sweep all of this under the rug. Chakotay's son? No, that's not Chakotay's son. That's actually Kola's son. Kazon? What Kazon? Let's get rid of them. Seska? No, she's dead. Suitor? No, he's dead. And Hogan, they made sure to kill Hogan off as well. And this may seem like a minor thing because he was just a minor background character who popped up occasionally, but it was sort of an indication of the kind of continuity, continuous storyline, having a recurring character that made this show more have a sense of continuity that Taylor didn't want. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that they killed Hogan off in this episode as well. Watching that episode, it's very obvious that it was, the writers preparing for Taylor's reign. And that's like, clearly she didn't want to do any of this shit, so let's get rid of it as quick as they can. And that irritates me. Now, I talked about this in other videos. I agree with the decision to get rid of the Kazon. They weren't that interesting of a villain. That's not to say I think they sucked or that the storylines in season 2 were bad. I think Piller used them well, and I understand Piller's instinct to do an ongoing storyline, but I think they served their purpose, and they weren't willing to really commit, like in the episode's alliances. If they actually committed and had Voyager make an alliance with them, then it really would have worked. But I suspect that was Berman and the producers. Well, not suspect, pretty much know. It was Berman and producers that held them back, that if Piller had his way, they would have went further, which I think would have made the show even better. And as I said, it goes along with a lot of people who are saying that Voyager should have been more serialized. But anyway, I do agree with Taylor's decision to get rid of the Kazon, but not Seska, not Suitor, and not Chakotay's son. I think Seska, I always talked about my idea of what they could have done. They could have had her, thrown her in the brig and had her be a member of Voyager, but maybe try to deceive them or try to be helpful, and she would be like this sort of untrustworthy anti-hero of sorts who's like a thorn in the side. Although 7 of 9 would end up filling that role later, but it would have a different dynamic. And that would have been much better, because she would have been a lot more villainous than 7 of 9. And Lone Suitor, I love the arc that they gave him in Basics Part 2. I thought it was definitely the best thing about the episode, and it was very tragic. But they could have done a lot more with this character, and I think it would have been way more interesting if he had survived taking back the ship, and then Voyager would be faced with the fact, like, do we show him leniency because he just saved our asses? He saved the ship. And so if they did, like, how would that involve, like, actually having him back on duty, and how people would feel with having a murderer work beside them, and him striving for redemption? That could have been a really great ongoing storyline, but then again, that would require continuity. That would require serialization, and that's something that Taylor didn't want. And the whole thing with Chakotay's son, that pisses me off because it's very obviously a retcon. It's very obvious that that's not their intention, that it was always their intention throughout the entire Season 2, including Basics Part 1, for that to be Chakotay's son. And because Basics Part 1 had a nice little scene with Chakotay's father, trying to convince Chakotay to embrace his son, even though, he was given birth without his consent. And so it was obvious they were setting up for that. And I think it would have really fleshed out Chakotay's character in a way that we needed. And a way that would have made his character way more interesting and brought an extra dynamic of him having to raise his worst enemy's son, who's also his son. That would have been really good. But again, that would require some serialization, and so Taylor is like, no, let's just retcon it to say it's not Chakotay's son, so we can just write him off the show. Lazy, boring. This is the kind of playing safe thing that ruined Voyager. Is inability to take risks. Now, all that being said, I don't mean to harp on Jeri Taylor too bad, because overall, I do think she is one of the stronger writers that Star Trek has ever had. I just disagreed with her instinct to get rid of continuity. I think she should have embraced it more. And also, I think, again, I come back to Season 4, where Season 4, everything, locked in place, and there was, some of the best writing of any season of Star Trek. And so I do have to give her a lot of credit for that. But it does seem like in this Season 3, that they were a bit rudderless. They were a bit lost without Piller there, and it took them a while to find their footing. Now, I will get to Season 5 of Deep Space Nine as I cover it. I have an unpopular opinion about Season 5 of Deep Space Nine, which was airing at the same time that Season 3 of Voyager was airing, and that is that it was one of the weaker seasons of Deep Space Nine, and that it was bland. Now, I know a lot of people share my opinion, but some people do, independently of me, they weren't influenced by me. They came to this decision on their own. So I'm not the only one who thinks Season 5 of DS9 is one of the weaker seasons of DS9. But just going with me for a second, even if you disagree with this, from my perspective, Star Trek got weak in the 96 through 97 year. That because the weakest season of Voyager and the second weakest of Deep Space Nine both aired side by side with bland, weak episodes from week to week, which is an occasional good one. But overall, weak episodes. So this led me to believe that the problem had to do with something in the leadership of Star Trek, with the producers, the studio, the Bermans, the people who were involved with both shows, that there was money issues or time issues or producers, something wrong with the producers, the production wasn't running smoothly. I have not found anything to corroborate these theories of mine. But I feel like it must be the case. And maybe because this was also the year that First Contact was released, so I would guess that a lot of the big studios' attention and maybe money and efforts were too focused on First Contact, and that both of these shows kind of fell by the wayside because of it. That's just, again, my total guess. Because, also in my opinion, I think both shows recovered at the same time. Because I think both seasons got better towards the end. I think Season 3 of Voyager recovered and started getting good towards the end of it, which is when I think the writers were finally getting their footing back and finally figuring out how to write for this show without Piller there and without having the other things like Kazon Vidians that they fell back on before. I would say it was right around the episode Distant Origin, which was episode 23 of season 3, which is a fan favorite, a pretty strong episode, followed by Displaced, which is a decent episode, not the best, but still interesting. And then Worst Case Scenario, which is a very fun holodeck episode that actually works. It's original. It stays true to the original premise with the Maquis. One of the best uses of the Maquis in the show. And then, of course, the Scorpion Part 1, which is one of the best episodes of the entire show. Which, to me, Scorpion has more of that quality of Season 4 than it does of Season 3. So, and I feel like Deep Space Nine was the same way. That towards the end of their Season 5, that's when it really got good with Blaze of Glory and Ties of Blood and Water and leading up to the big Call to Arms finale, which was freaking spectacular. So I feel like, and this is just my theory, and I know a lot of people disagree with me because a lot of people love Season 5 of DS9, but I just feel like that because of the production of First Contact, that something happened with the studio where they weren't having enough money or attention given to the shows, but then after First Contact, they slowly started to build up, and then towards the end of both seasons, they kicked into gear and got way better. And also, what also signified this, because I remember watching it when they first came out. At the same time, towards the end of Season 3 of Voyager and towards the end of Season 5 of DS9, both shows came out with a commercial saying, "Get ready for the end of the season. We're really going to kick into high gear." And they were like previewing like 4 or 5 episodes. Like, next week on Deep Space Nine, they travel back in time and have descendants or whatever. And then next Voyager, Seska returns and she takes over the show. Like, and so they were like previewing like 4 or 5 episodes. And this was, to my knowledge, the only time that Voyager Deep Space Nine ever ran such a commercial. And it doesn't, so it's too much of a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence that they just so happen to have weak seasons and then both release this commercial at the same time and then have stronger ends to the season where the season picks up for both shows at the same time. This can't be a coincidence. I don't think I'm just reading into this. I feel like this is there was something going on behind the scenes with the brass of Star Trek at the time, and that they got their shit together towards the end of both of those seasons. Now with Season 3 of Voyager, as I said, I think a lot of it had to do with them finally finding their footing and getting all that junk out of their heads with the first batch of episodes of Season 3. Now, let me sort of get more specific about Season 3. Because Michel Piller said, what is this episode about? Was it due to strengthen the characters? And I feel like when he first left, they were like, oh, fuck it, let's not worry about any of that, and let's just... In fact, I have a quote from Jeri Taylor herself, who says that there was their goal to get back to the fun adventures of the original series, to just go off and do fun adventures. And she didn't say this, but I think it's implied, and not worry about character stories. She, of course, didn't say that, but I that was the silent part of that, in my opinion. And that's exactly how Season 3 reads. We got episodes like The Swarm, which tries to reinvent the Doctor and has the alien of the week attacking that nobody gives a shit about. It brings back the Ferengi from TNG and has this silly plot that nobody cares about. It has this, boring plot of Janeway going off on this religious adventure or whatever. It has them travel back in time and do these time travel shenanigans, which were ill-informed and not really worked very well. It had Cass taken over by this warlord. Isn't this fun? Ooh, warlord. But it doesn't say anything about the characters. It doesn't mean anything the way that the episodes in season 2 did. It has Q return, and he's 5 times misogynistic, and it's a ridiculous plot with the Q Civil War when they're in the American Civil War setting, and they have the giant viruses. Isn't this cool? But it doesn't actually say anything. And oh yes, Fatal Attraction. Let's do Fatal Attraction by have this alien controlling a hologram that's obsessed with Tuvok and whatever the fuck Coda was. That giant mess of it. And let's throw Tom and B'Elanna together for no goddamn reason, even though they have no chemistry. This is what season 3 was doing. Now, there are 2 exceptions, I believe, before we get to Distant Origins. I think there are 2 exceptions of good episodes, of strong episodes. There's some other decent episodes, but really good, strong episodes, there's 2 exceptions. Unity, which is when they first introduced the Borg, and I think they got that shot in the arm that, ooh, the Borg. And a lot of people were disappointed with this at first because this is the first time seeing the Borg on Voyager, so they're expecting it more action-packed. But I think it was actually a really great character story, especially for Chakotay, which is something they're sort of getting away from, not writing for him very well. And the other one is Remember, which actually happens towards the beginning of the season. It's a strong Holocaust denial analogy, and it's about the power of propaganda, and something that I'm very, very interested in, and I think it does it very, very well. However, for the explanation of why Remember is so good in the sea of other bad episodes, it's quite simple. The script was written for TNG. It was already written for TNG. They just rewrote it and changed some of the characters and changed the setting to Voyager and changed, Counselor Troy to B'Elanna and changed some of the characters around. And I believe if the timeline matches up, it was written for season 7 of TNG. But yeah, so that explains why that was, because they already had that script, where the other scripts, they were just trying to come up and, let's do fun adventures, and it would come off this silly, boring, and not very good character stories. It lacked that heart that season 1 and 2 had, even through its bad episodes. It still had that heart, that strong sense of character, a strong sense of community. But now, let's just have Janeway fight giant viruses and Kes become a warlord. No heart, no reason. It doesn't mean anything, as Piller would say. And the other thing is, the episodes of season 3 are derivative. They're unoriginal, I would say, for the most part. They just recycle the very typical Star Trek plots, such as, crew members are falsely accused and thrown into prison, or, someone's body gets taken over by an alien, or, I don't know, just very stereotypical. They did bring the Ferengis back, bring Pung Far back, bring the Borg back, and yeah, just a lot of, derivative plots. Not quite as bad as season 1 and 2 of Enterprise, but it's kind of a precursor to that. And say what you will about season 2, they did have original ideas, original plots. They had, a duplicate Voyager with 2 Janeways talking to each other. They had, Don Quixote type storyline where Janeway has to trust this, crazy guy. And like it or hate it, and most people hate it, Threshold was an original idea. Say what you will about it, but it wasn't derivative. It didn't work, and neither did Tuvix for that matter, but they were original. And that's the thing with season 3 is it feels like they weren't trying. It feels like they were just like, yeah, let's just do this. We did this before. And I really, really strongly suspect that is due to a lack of Michel Piller driving them to do better. But, as I said, they found their footing towards the end of season 3, and then season 4 ended up being their masterpiece, even better than the first 2 seasons. And I think a lot of that had to do, I think Brennan Braga and Joe Manowski found a good partnership, and they hit their stride. They did Scorpion, they did Year of Hell, and I think they both like created 7 of 9 and made a really good arc for her. And I think the writing team was just the A-listers, like Lisa Klink was still there and Brian Fuller joined, and so they had like, it was the one year that had all the good writers there. So yeah, that's why I think season 4 worked where season 3 did not. The other interesting thing of note about the writing staff was from the accounts of people like Lisa Klink and Brian Fuller. They talked about, because both of them worked on Deep Space Nine first, and they talked about how they would have preferred to work on Deep Space Nine. They would have rather been hired on there, but I think with Lisa Klink, they didn't need anyone for Deep Space Nine at the time, so they hired her on Voyager. For Brian Fuller, he said that there was a spot on Deep Space Nine available, but for whatever reason, he was put on Voyager instead. Now, I think Brian Fuller in particular talked about how, and also Lisa Klink, I think, how the writing, the atmosphere in the writer's room was much better in Deep Space Nine, much more conducive, much more friendly, much more conducive to creativity, whereas I believe Brian Fuller described the feeling, the tone of the writer's room in Voyager as snobbish, as more guarded. And this would have been even for season 4. Even the season I think is great. So I think that also says something. Not, again, this isn't necessarily because of Piller, because apparently the writing situation was tense when he was there, but at least they were putting out good stories. But I think that does say something, speak to how Deep Space Nine was better than Voyager, one of the many, many reasons. So yeah, that's it. It's all the sort of theories and research could take me on why season 3 of Voyager was so lackluster, was so bad. It's because they were recovering from the big mistake of firing Michel Piller, pushing him out. You know, officially he left. That's what he said. I left the show because I wanted to, but really they said if he doesn't leave, we're gonna leave. And as I said, if I were Berman, I would be like, get the fuck out then. But he didn't. And and I think they were like, oh, we're free, we can do whatever they want. And they did a lot of crap. Piller wasn't there to constrain them, to put those constraints, which I actually think were helpful, to be like, no, you got to push yourself. What is this about? What do the characters do? Why are you writing this episode? And I think it seems to me in that first part of season 3, they were just like, wee! And then towards the end, I think they finally realized that the we wasn't working and said, okay, we need to get back to getting our shit together. And then voila, you get the best season next, season 4. And season 5, 6, and 7, I do cover in another video where Jeri Taylor left the show and how detrimental that was when she left, and how Rick Berman started to, take over and completely put his fingers in the show, and Berman is not creative at all, so it's ended up playing it safe and being dull and boring. But Voyager did have 3 really good seasons, in my opinion, seasons 1, 2, and 4. But That is just my humble opinion. Anyway, that is it for my commentary of Season 3 of Voyager, the writing of Season 3 of Voyager. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Voyager and Deep Space Nine. I'm just about to start Season 3 of Voyager, so if you want to hear me complain more specifically about specific episodes, you can check out my channel for that. And also as I cover Deep Space Nine Season 5 and get into why I'm not as big of a fan of that season as many others are. And yeah, you can check out my channel. I'll continue to do other videos on Star Trek and many other videos in the archives where I covered all of Star Trek up to this point. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.